Since the massacre at Columbine High School. Good evening, I'm John Scott. You're watching the Fox Report. The community there gathering to honor the 13 lives lost and to lift up the families and survivors who have now lived with the trauma for 2 decades. One of the students who was there that day telling Fox's Neil Cavuto about the moment that changed his life forever.
No pressure, right?
Immediately dismissed it as fireworks or construction noise. And from the moment that I realized what was happening was real, it wasn't until I actually saw the perpetrators that I accepted that what was happening was real, but I completely disassociated. So I've always been able to recall everything that happened that day, but it was almost like I was watching it on television. I wasn't present in my own body. So it was a very surreal experience that took me many, many years to process and heal from.
Alicia Acuna is reporting live from Littleton, Colorado right now. Alicia.
Hi, John. Pastor James Hawksworth began the services today by telling those in attendance that hope did not die 20 years ago, and that really has been the theme of the memorial services that is continuing behind me, the message of hope and the continuing of life. And then the superintendent of the school district took the mic, and he said today is a time to reflect on what has been accomplished since and how to move forward in the future.
We were naive prior to 1999. We did not see the future. We did not know that anything like what happened could happen in the future. And if we had, we would not have believed it could happen at Columbine.
Ron Mitchell reminded everyone listening that evil did not win and that the community of Columbine took on a job it never wanted to teach the rest of the nation how to prepare for this specific type of tragedy. They lead the nation in school safety and security and help the country make improvements in law enforcement communication and security protocols. The service is organized in a way that the victims' family members, survivors, and friends are able to mark this day with as much privacy as possible. Organizers have requested that none of their faces be shown as we cover what is happening on the stage, something we of course are honoring. Many members of the community have gathered here too, including the current principal of Columbine, who came to work here 10 years ago.
Our students today know the kids who went to class in the very same rooms they now sit in are connected to them.
I, for one, will treasure this family that I've been lucky to have for countless years to come. Columbine is truly everything that people always say it is. It has become a place that students will forever be grateful for, and this is the goal that every teacher, coach, and administrator has. To have this feeling of acceptance and gratitude occur for so many people, even 20 years later, is a success story in and of itself. The heart that is such an essential part of Columbine isn't something that I've been taught, but rather have felt and experienced and has been passed on from generations down to mine.
John, we learned that 16 teachers who were there that day 20 years ago still go to work every day and teach in that building. That is a representation of the resiliency and hope that this community represents. John. Alicia
Acuna, thank you. And if you would like to watch the ceremonies, we have them for you live on foxnews.com. Now to the latest on the release of the redacted version of the Mueller report. The Democrats split on what to do next. Some of the more left-leaning lawmakers demand impeachment proceedings begin on President Trump. Other House Democrats are wary of going down that road. Here's House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
The Congress of the United States will honor its oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, to protect our democracy. We believe that the first Article 1, the legislative branch, has a responsibility of oversight of our democracy, and we will exercise that.
We have Fox News team coverage of this story. Phil Keating will have President Trump's reaction. But we begin with Ellison Barber, who's live in Washington. She has reaction from Capitol Hill. Ellison.
Hi, John. Democrats say Attorney General Bill Barr misled the American public. Lawmakers are set to hear from the Attorney General in about a week and a half. He'll testify before the Judiciary Committees in both chambers of Congress, the Senate on May 1st, the House on May 2nd. But that's not all that Democrats are asking for. They also want to hear from Special Counsel Robert Mueller, and they want to see more of his report. No redactions and all of the underlying documents. Yesterday, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee issued a subpoena for it and told the Justice Department they must comply by May 1st.
We have to hear from Barr, which we will on May 2nd. We have to hear from Mueller and ask him a lot of questions. We have to hold hearings and hear from other people, both on the question of obstruction of justice, where, as I said, the special prosecutor invited Congress to look into that, not the Attorney General. We have to look into all that. We need the entire report, unredacted, and the underlying documents in order to make informed decisions.
DOJ says Chairman Jerry Nadler's subpoena is both premature and unnecessary. In a statement, a DOJ spokesperson said there are minimal redactions in the report provided on Thursday, and they've tried to make arrangements for Chairman Nadler and other members of Congress to review a report with, quote, even fewer redactions. But that offer was only for 12 members of Congress. Top Democrats said it was unacceptable, in part because the DOJ's proposal would prohibit discussions of the full report with other members, even those on the relevant committee with the appropriate security clearances. Democrats say they're going to do more in regards to the special counsel's report, and that is what the special counsel wanted. On page 220 of the report, it says this, quote, Congress has authority to prohibit a president's corrupt use of his authority in order to protect the integrity of the administration of justice. Democrats are pointing to that as proof that Congress, not the Attorney General, needs to find an answer on obstruction.
This report is far from the end of the inquiry that this country needs and deserves. It is the beginning of another chapter.
Chairman Nadler put in a request for Mueller to testify in front of the House Judiciary Committee as soon as possible. He says he wants him there no later than May 23rd. John?
Allison Barber in Washington, thank you.
You bet.
The president is spending his weekend at his Mar-a-Lago resort, but he is continuing to attack the special counsel's probe, firing off a series of tweets criticizing it. Phil Keating joins us live from West Palm Beach, just outside the president's Florida home. Phil.
John, a very pleasant evening has begun at Mar-a-Lago, the president's winter White House over on Palm Beach Island, and that is where the president is expected to stay put for the rest of this evening. For the second straight day, the president spent about 6 hours down the boulevard at his nearby Trump International Golf Club. Aside from golf, the other big issue dominating this weekend for the president, of course, the redacted Mueller report. He shot out a thread of heated tweets, not only about the report's findings, but the reaction to it. Here is just one of those tweets, quote, the fake news media is doing everything possible to stir up and anger the polls and as many people as possible, seldom mentioning the fact that the Mueller report had as its principal conclusion the fact that there was no collusion with Russia. The Russia hoax is dead, he wrote. Trump also is threatening retaliation against those who pushed for the 2-year investigation. On the obstruction of justice part of the probe, Mueller listed 10 things that happened which could be seen as obstruction of justice, but he declined to indict the sitting president, but also writing within the report that while he tried, he could not, in the end, exonerate Trump, leaving any further steps to Congress. Here's the Trump motorcade returning to Mar-a-Lago earlier, about 3 hours ago, and you get a glimpse of the president giving the crowd along the road a big thumbs up. Many Trump supporters call the report full vindication, and it's apparently been good for Trump's 2020 re-election campaign. According to the campaign's Michael Glassner, quote, the release of the full Mueller report directly led to the campaign raising more than $1 million. Relative to our recent daily average, the Mueller news drove a 250% increase in fundraising from the grassroots donors. The White House press office also sharing photos of yesterday's celebrity round of golf. Rush Limbaugh paired up with Trump and professional golfer Lexi Thompson for their round of 18. The White House Correspondents Association says the press travel pool, which was just down the street, should have been the cameras invited for these images, but were not. And a fresh tweet just out from the White House, the winter White House right now, by presidential senior advisor Dan Scavino. He said, I am with the president at the Southern White House. I have never seen him happier. As for the rest of the weekend, we don't expect any public events. None are scheduled for the president. However, tomorrow morning, we do expect him to do what he did here last Easter Sunday, and that is to depart Mar-a-Lago and go attend Easter services nearby at a church on Palm Beach before heading back to Washington and the partisan feuding later in the day. John.
A little respite from that for now. Phil Keating. Phil, thank you.
Yeah.
Meantime, the countdown to 2020 continues as former Vice President Joe Biden is expected to jump into the presidential race next week. Meanwhile, Senator Elizabeth Warren is one of the first candidates urging the House to begin impeachment proceedings against President Trump. Garrett Tenney is in Washington with more on that.
The Democratic field is about to get a little bigger this week with the addition of former Vice President Joe Biden. Two sources with knowledge of Biden's plans tell Fox News he's expected to declare his candidacy on Wednesday, though they said it could slip to Thursday. The theme of his announcement will be the battle for the soul of America. And the site for his campaign rollout, according to the Philadelphia Inquirer, will be Charlottesville, Virginia. For months, the 76-year-old has led nearly every poll of 2020 Democratic candidates, even without officially entering the race. This week in Boston, Biden gave a preview of his pitch to blue-collar workers at a union rally for grocery store workers who are on strike.
Guys, that's not hyperbole. That's just a simple fact. That's a fact. The middle class built this place. And you know who built the middle class? Unions. Unions built the middle, not a joke.
As he enters the race, one of the leading questions facing Democratic hopefuls is whether Congress should impeach President Trump following the release of the Mueller report. Democratic leaders have largely resisted that effort, but a number of candidates are now calling for it. Earlier today, Senator Elizabeth Warren doubled down on her calls at an organizing event in New Hampshire.
I get that there are a lot of folks who say this is politically charged, Democrats shouldn't go here. Just stay away from it. There's an election coming up. But there are some things that are bigger than politics. I have called on the House to initiate impeachment proceedings.
We've been reporting for weeks that Biden's team has been preparing for him to enter the race by reaching out to donors, saying they want to make a big splash with donations within that first 24 hours after he enters the race. So that'll be something to keep a close eye on over this next week as well. John?
Garrett Tenney reporting. Garrett, thank you. Well, still reeling after the fire at Notre Dame Cathedral, Paris is once again in flames. Yellow vest protesters stormed the city center earlier today, sending a clear message to the government there that rebuilding Notre Dame isn't the only problem that country needs to solve. Molly Line is in Paris with more.
Good evening, John. The tens of thousands of police officers were called up by the French government for today, despite the fact that this is Easter weekend, despite the fact that, as you mentioned, the Notre Dame Cathedral was in flames earlier this week. The yellow vest protesters still took to the streets here in Paris and in other places across France as well. There were literally thousands of them here in the City of Lights, blocking streets, throwing bottles, setting fires. Police responded with water cannons, tear gas, and stun grenades. In weeks past, the yellow vests have ransacked businesses, most notably along the famous Champs-Élysées. They are predominantly middle and lower class citizens voicing their frustration over the economy, high taxes, and the leadership of French President Emmanuel Macron. And now some reportedly are angered by the billion-dollar outpouring to restore Notre Dame.
Social justice and justice for fair distribution of goods. I think what happened at Notre Dame is a great tragedy, but humans should be more important than stones. And if humans had a little bit more money, they too could help finance the reconstruction work at Notre Dame. I find this disgusting.
Macron had been slated to speak about the concerns of the protesters and their movement, but postponed his speech when the cathedral caught fire. He has shifted his focus this week to the efforts to rebuild, meeting with the cultural arm of the United Nations, UNESCO. Yellow Vest leaders have expressed their concerns that they feel unheard and that their concerns are still unaddressed. The Yellow Vests never materialized here on the streets around Notre Dame. There had been threats that they would be heading in this direction. It did not happen today. Instead, it was a peaceful day, but mostly tourists wandering around on this Easter weekend. But of course, Easter services must be moved, not in the Notre Dame Cathedral this weekend. Instead, they've been moved to the nearby Saint Eustache. John?
Molly Line reporting from Paris. Molly, thank you. A staggering $1 billion already raised to rebuild Notre Dame, but even that might not be enough to cover the cost. That's according to a spokesperson for the church who says the total expenses could be double or triple what's already been pledged. Officials are still investigating what began that massive fire, saying it could take them weeks to reach a firm conclusion. Take a live look at Littleton, Colorado now, where a vigil is still underway, marking 20 years since the shootings at Columbine. We'll hear more about that harrowing day and its aftermath from the people who lived it. Plus, a new proposal on securing the southern border as a dramatic security scare comes to light.
I think most Americans watching what's happening. It's unprecedented, so I think this is a big issue, and if Democrats are smart, They'll try to work with the president and secure the border and close the loopholes.
Police in Northern Ireland arresting 2 teens in connection with the death of a journalist. The 29-year-old Lyra McKee hit by a stray bullet while covering a fiery riot in Londonderry. Authorities are now questioning the 2 teens who are part of the new IRA dissident group. They were taken into custody under anti-terrorism legislation. The leaders of Northern Ireland's 6 political parties have issued a joint statement condemning the attack. Heightened tensions on the southern U.S. border as we learn about an incident last week in which Mexican soldiers briefly detained 2 American service members at gunpoint on the U.S. side of the border. Jeff Paul has more from Los Angeles.
John, military officials confirming the U.S. soldiers were conducting border support operations in an unmarked CBP vehicle. The incident happening 1 week ago in Clint, Texas, which is about 23 miles southeast of El Paso. They were stopped and questioned by 5 or 6 Mexican military members who thought they had crossed over. But in a statement, Northern Command says though they were south of the border fence, U.S. soldiers remained in U.S. territory north of the actual border. Throughout the incident, the U.S. soldiers followed all established procedures and protocols. We're also learning U.S. Customs and Border Protection has just awarded a contract to build soft-sided temporary facilities in El Paso and Donna, Texas. CBP says its processing facilities right now are at a breaking point. Officials are hoping the shelters help with the unprecedented number of families and unaccompanied children crossing the border each day. But those who live in those impacted border towns have mixed feelings about the shelters.
I think it's a good idea, so because at least they don't, they're not on the street.
We can't accept everybody coming in seeking asylum as much as we want to. Tents are not going to stop asylum seekers. We need immigration reform.
The facilities are each expected to house up to 500 people and could be up and running May 1st. Meanwhile, in Las Cruces, New Mexico, the city is calling on volunteers to help. So far, the city says it's accepted and served around 1,300 asylum seekers and is expecting even more. It says around 230 migrants were just transferred from local shelters to Las Cruces High School.
The reason to bring them to Las Cruces High School is to give volunteers who've been working nonstop since this began a week ago today a much-needed break and an opportunity to reconstitute the shelters themselves.
And the FBI has just announced it arrested a man who was part of a group of private citizens detaining migrants at the border. 69-year-old Larry Mitchell Hopkins was arrested in New Mexico for being a felon in possession of a weapon. Federal agents say Hopkins and a group of so-called border militia vigilantes have been operating without the authority of the CBP. John.
All right, Jeff Paul. Jeff, thank you. Meanwhile, an Arizona construction company making a pitch to lawmakers and government officials on what it says could be a faster and cheaper way to put up miles of new border fence. William LaJeunesse has that story.
214 miles of border fence for a little over $3 billion. That's what this Arizona company promises to build in 14 months.
We have the technology to easily produce over a mile a day. And if the contracts were bigger, we could gear up to our threshold of about 2 miles a day.
That compares to a mile every week or 2 at the current pace. Not fast enough for some in Congress today who got a first-hand look.
What we're learning is that this can be done in a cost-effective manner, in a timely manner.
Here's how. This morning, a backhoe dug a 6-foot deep trench. An excavator dropped in a pre-made steel fence, followed moments later by a cement truck. What makes this unique is a fiber optic cable detecting anything or anyone approaching within 30 feet. Paired with a radar and camera, the system provides better situational awareness.
If someone has the ability to do it faster, cheaper, at a higher quality, bonding, if you will, to protect the taxpayer from all those claims not being true, I'm interested in that. I think the taxpayer is as well.
Along the border, 754 miles is fenced, about 2/3 to block pedestrian traffic, another third a vehicle barrier. The president wants another 450 miles by the end of his term.
40 miles in the last 2 years is not acceptable with the crisis that's there.
You gotta have a wall. You gotta have a wall. If you don't have a wall, it's never gonna end.
The Fisher bid is unsolicited, but officials from Homeland Security and the Corps of Engineers did attend today's demonstration to see for themselves if a mile a day or more is doable. In Coolidge, Arizona, William LaJeunesse, Fox News.
House Democrats grappling over the possibility of impeachment proceedings against President Trump.
I don't think we have the votes there for an impeachment. And if the president ends up at the end of the day, successful in resisting impeachment, that could be interpreted by the American people as vindication.
So what will top House Democrats do now after the release of the redacted Mueller report? And 9 years ago, BP's Deepwater Horizon drilling rig exploded, pouring millions of gallons of oil into the Gulf of Mexico. Why experts believe the ecosystem still has not recovered. Plus, the ceremony to remember those who lost their lives in the attack at Columbine High School. We'll take a look back at this horrific event.
Sending in our positive thoughts.
We had a very awful day that happened in our community that brought us closer together, but we believe that what we placed our attention on, we give power to, so we wanted to give power to the good times as well.
The special counsel made clear that he did not exonerate the president, and the responsibility now falls to Congress to hold the president accountable for his actions. Congress must get the full unredacted report along with the underlying evidence uncovered by special counsel Mueller. Congress requires this material in order to perform our constitutionally mandated responsibilities.
That's House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler demanding Congress see the full Mueller report without the black lines through it. Hello, I'm John Scott, and this is the Fox Report. It's the bottom of the hour, and if you're just joining us, a redacted version of the Mueller report released on Thursday says Congress has the power to decide whether President Trump obstructed justice. It reads, the conclusion that Congress may apply the obstruction laws to the president's corrupt exercise of the powers of office accords with our constitutional system of checks and balances and the principle that no person is above the law. Eliza Collins, USA Today congressional reporter, joins us now. Eliza, there was only one report, but it is being interpreted in two very different ways, and that generally breaks down by party.
Exactly. If you were to listen to each party, you'd think that it's two different reports. Republicans are saying the president is completely exonerated on all charges. Democrats need to apologize for bringing this up. Democrats are seizing on details of the document, saying that they've laid out a case for obstruction of justice, and Mueller is basically, as Jackie Spear told me, begging Congress to do something. So there's two completely different accounts of the same document.
The document suggests that the president could be prosecuted in Congress on obstruction charges. Ken Starr was on with Neil Cavuto earlier today. He obviously knows a thing or two about this kind of investigation. He says he does not see obstruction. Listen.
First of all, I don't think that even if he had fired Bob Mueller, that had been carried through, that would constitute obstruction, right? So I'm just talking about the act that seems to have really galvanized everyone's attention and energy. Oh, he wanted to fire the special counsel. The president had the authority to do that.
But it does seem the Democrats want to go after the president on obstruction or maybe some other charges.
Absolutely. So Robert Mueller laid out a few instances where the president at least tried to tamper with the investigation, but Mueller says that he was not successful because his aides ultimately did not carry that out. And so I talked to Congressman Jim Jordan, who's a close ally of the president's, says that this is basically a very definitive Trump is cleared. But I asked Jordan about those instances, and he basically said that this is nothing because it did not actually happen. That is the key here, and that is why the president is cleared. Trump may have tried to do those, but that was his constitutional duty to be able to decide who he wants to have work for him.
So Democrat Jerry Nadler from the Judiciary Committee in the House wants the unredacted report. He has subpoenaed that. His committee has. But the Attorney General is not allowed by law to give an unredacted report to Congress, is he?
No. Well, the grand jury material is what has to be redacted. And Chairman Jerry Nadler is asking for the whole thing to be unredacted. So we are now going to a court battle. This is not going away anytime soon. The Attorney General offered for some members of Congress to see a less redacted version, but Nadler and Democratic leadership rejected that, saying it was too few people and there still were redactions. So they are now subpoenaing for the full report. So this is not going away. This is just going to be a fight for what they can get of the report.
Obviously, this all started with a question as to whether or not the Russian government or its operatives interfered in the election. Let me read you part of the conclusion of the report. It says the investigation also identified numerous links between the Russian government and the Trump campaign. Although the investigation established that the Russian government perceived it would benefit from a Trump presidency and worked to secure that, expected it Russian government in its election interference activities. So when the president tweets out, as he did today, that the Russia collusion hoax is dead, is he right?
Well, it depends who you ask. They did not rise to the level of criminality, so Mueller did not prosecute the president or anyone on his campaign for that. But it doesn't necessarily, it's a little bit more vague than that. It's not just completely no collusion, because it does say members of the campaign expected to benefit from Russian help. So Democrats are seizing on that part. Republicans are seizing on the part that says it did not rise to the level of criminality. And so both sides are able to spin it.
Meantime, Speaker Pelosi, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, seems to squirm when talk of impeachment comes up. But there are other Democrats, notably Elizabeth Warren, who's running for president, who is demanding that the House begin impeachment proceedings. This party is divided on that question.
Absolutely. So about a month ago, I interviewed Nancy Pelosi, and she said impeachment would be a gift to the president unless Republicans were on board. So the Mueller report has come out. Republicans are still not on board, but some of the details in the report, some Democrats feel are enough to start impeachment proceedings. You mentioned Elizabeth Warren, who's running against or hoping to run against President Trump in the 2020 election. Other Democrats, sort of the more progressive wing, have also said that they feel impeachment should be on the table. Some leaders of the Democratic Party are basically saying, let's not rule it out, but they're kind of trying to have it both ways. And Pelosi stayed pretty quiet. But again, this is an issue that's not going away, because Democrats feel there were details of the report that some feel could lead to impeachment.
Eliza Collins, who covers Congress for USA Today, thank you.
Thanks.
Another look now at the vigil underway in Littleton, Colorado, as that community marks 20 years since the massacre at Columbine High School. Shepard Smith has a look back at how that terrible day unfolded, told by the people who lived it.
It started like any other day.
I went to the school library, study for tests.
We walked through the library, going to head out the back door to the junior parking lot.
I stopped and found a seat in the library to read a magazine.
I heard some popping noises coming from outside. I thought that they were firecrackers and some seniors were pulling a prank. And teacher ran into the room. She was completely frantic. She started yelling at all of us to hide.
We got under a table with two students who we didn't know, and we waited.
I ran maybe 10 feet in front of me and hid, pulled a chair in next to me and thought that I had a really great hiding spot.
And immediately they were shooting off their guns. They were taunting or making fun of students before they shot or killed them, kind of treating it like it was a game.
I turned around to see one of the shooters leaning down behind me and knew that my turn was coming, and it did.
Each of them fired multiple shots under our table, and I was hit twice, and Corey was killed instantly.
And they shot and killed Isaiah and then shot and killed Matt.
The school is in a panic, and I'm in the library. I've got students down under the table, kids, heads under the table. Kids are screaming. Some of the teachers are, trying to take control of it. We need to leave here. Okay, we're getting them there.
The SWAT team there is still rescuing students from inside that high school. This is Columbine High School, Littleton, a suburb of Denver.
People were getting shot all around me.
When they were shooting in the library, we heard them screaming. After they'd shoot up something, they'd go, woo!
Excitement in the hallways as they gun down their classmates. That's the reality tonight, live from Littleton, Colorado.
Look at where we are. We're in the burbs, for God's sakes. I mean,
This was a safe place.
The SWAT team, the bomb squad, people from ATF, many different agencies, both federal and state, as well as local, all out there. And certainly before they put any of the investigators in to figure out how this happened and to get the victims out of there, they wanted to get all these bombs first.
They were shooting people left and right.
Scenes which people in combat don't witness. The gunning down of their classmates completely out of the blue, wondering now exactly what went wrong. Could somebody have stopped it? And what in the world do we do next?
How could somebody do that? I mean, whether or not they had problems or they were angry, they took other kids' lives.
One picture that certainly spoke 1,000 words today was this: a boy trying to run from two of his classmates who were going on a rampage inside.
The first thing I saw was a young boy, and all I could see was his legs covered in blood. And being a nurse, I knew that it was my responsibility to stop.
Police here, sheriff's officials telling us, quote, this was a well-planned mission, a suicide mission, which ended exactly as the students had expected. We're just a few hundred yards from the school where we've been reporting all day, and kids have been coming in with flowers. They've set up a makeshift memorial. Now, 20 years later, not far from that spot, a permanent memorial stands, a place to reflect and remember those who died.
What I most want people to know about Daniel, besides just his kind nature and his intelligence, was that he was someone who took on his weaknesses.
Rachel had a fun, mischievous, bubbly side to her. Her personality was very outgoing, but she also had a very deep, sober side that people didn't see.
You know, he was a very silent force. He was a man of few words unless he was on the field. And I think that we just always wanted to make him proud.
Columbine also forced changes in the response to active shooters.
The protocol was, let's secure the perimeter. And we had a school resource officer that was exchanging gunfire on the outside and being told he could not go until SWAT arrived. And I can attest to this because I was on the street with the officers and they were ready to break rank to go into that building because they knew there were kids' lives in danger.
But the students he couldn't protect are never far from his mind.
I still have that survivor's guilt, and I'm trying to do everything I can that unfortunately those kids lost their life, but I didn't want them to die in vain. And every morning I wake up, I recite their names in Mr. Sanders' name.
After the shooting, Austin Eubanks abused drugs to cope with his grief. He's clean now and devoted to helping others who got hooked on drugs after trauma.
I can't tell you how much it means to be able to work with organizations or with individuals and have my personal story or my expertise be able to change the trajectory of their lives.
Craig Scott says he uses his story and his sister's legacy to motivate and inspire kids.
My hope is that on the 20th anniversary that people would stop if they want to do anything in remembrance of what happened at Columbine. Do this. Tell your family you love them that day.
For Casey Johnson, an author and mother, finding a way to tell her story took some time, but she now says she's using her past for good things.
I almost feel this responsibility as a survivor of Columbine to walk the road with the other victims of these events and kind of cheerlead them along the way and let them know that there is hope and there is goodness still to come and it's all worth the journey.
Shepard Smith reporting. As we mark 20 years since the shooting at Columbine High School, we'll be right back.
Act of kindness, a loving gesture. Do it for them. I promise you'll.
Hurricane Michael, which devastated the Florida Panhandle last fall, actually was a Category 5 storm. The National Hurricane Center decided to retroactively upgrade the storm. It's now estimated Michael's winds reached 160 miles an hour when that fierce storm made landfall near Mexico Beach last year. The upgrade means it is the 4th strongest hurricane to make landfall in the United States. On this day 9 years ago, BP's Deepwater Horizon drilling rig exploded, leaking more than 200 million gallons of oil into the Gulf of Mexico, the biggest marine oil spill in U.S. history. Now, environmental experts say the surrounding ecosystems have not fully recovered and that some might never do so. Phil Keating spoke with them and filed this report.
When the Macondo oil well blew out 5,000 feet below the surface, up above, the Deepwater horizon exploded into an inferno, killing 11, injuring 17, and triggering an environmental and economic disaster that would dominate the summer of 2010. For 3 months, America watched the round-the-clock live footage of 62,000 barrels of oil a day gushing into the Gulf of Mexico, affecting 70,000 square miles of the Gulf and polluting the coastlines of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. In total, the disaster flushed 5 million barrels of oil into the Gulf, causing extensive damage to marine life, wildlife, the fishing industry, and tourism.
Pretty much all hell had broken loose.
At the time, Stephen Morosky was the chief scientist with the National Marine Fisheries Service. He's now with the University of South Florida, and over the years, he and his team have spent extensive time studying the Gulf.
The scorecard is decidedly mixed on the effects of the Deepwater horizon on fisheries and marine life. Animals like red snapper, for example, initially had relatively high levels of oil in their bodies, and that's been going down over time as the level of contaminants have declined there. But that's not true for all species.
The worst impacts were to shrimp, oysters, and crabs. LSU's Ed Overton, an environmental chemist, focused on the oil itself and where it went.
It gets degraded back to other microorganisms, part of the food chain, and carbon dioxide. So virtually all of it, not 100%, but 95+% has been metabolized.
In a steady progression.
Morosky says it still remains in recovery mode 9 years later.
We do see these effects, and we will see these effects for a long time.
The impact to BP itself, the cost of the disaster, the cleanup, the thousands of payouts to claimants, plus the enormous federal fines. In total, costing the company an estimated $65 billion. In St. Petersburg, Florida, Phil Keating, Fox News.
The New York International Auto Show is in town, and Jackie Heinrich is there. Jackie?
Well, John, we're in the don't touch anything section. Over $15 million worth of automotive elegance represented here. We're going to tell you about the trends in luxury vehicles and also what impact tariffs are having on the industry.
Car lovers in New York City are getting a first glance at some very exciting vehicles hitting the market soon. All part of the New York International Auto Show. Jackie Heinrich has the highlights from New York City's Javits Center. Jackie.
Hey, John, I'm in the eye candy section. This is the Koenigsegg Jesko. The price tag is $3.2 million. 1 million people make their way to the New York International Auto Show every year, but everyone makes their way to this luxury area. Over $15 million worth of automotive elegance is represented in this exhibit, and with the industry experiencing an economic boom, more and more of these people can dream of driving off in one of these luxury vehicles. In 2017, national auto sales reached an all-time high, but that number plateaued in 2018 and then fell in the first quarter of this year. It's left some automakers concerned about what tariffs will do to the industry.
The industry is very concerned about the tariffs things. The impact on vehicle sales and the cost of cars would be enormous. The loss of jobs in both on the manufacturing sector and on the retail sector that employs a million people around the country would all be seriously impacted.
But the uncertainty in Washington is certainly not throttling any of the excitement here in New York. I'm talking to Adam Weinstein of Manhattan Motors. This is the big money section of this display.
No question about it. And having the Koenigsegg Jesko here, one of the cars that has reached the limit in terms of what we've been able to do as mankind, is unquestionable.
And you've got so many different kinds of vehicles from many different countries. What kinds of cars do you have here?
So we have the BAC Mono from England. We have the Rimac of Croatia. Glickenhaus, which is actually from Sleepy Hollow, New York.
Wow. What makes these cars iconic? Everyone comes here to see these big ticket items.
As a world-leading automotive retailer, we try to put together an eclectic group of cars that have the leaders in technology, luxury, styling, and performance.
Okay, it's the pinnacle of the American dream to be able to dream of one of these things. And actually, most people who come to the auto show plan to buy a vehicle within the next 12 months, 68% of them. So it's not all window shopping here in New York. John.
All right, Jackie Heinrich, looks like fun. Don't get any fingerprints on
Sure
those
is.
cars. Thanks, Jackie. All right, cute or creepy? You decide. Strange video showing an Easter bunny busting a move. The story behind this video. And stay tuned for an all-new Waters World tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern. Here's Jesse with a preview.
A very, very special Waters Words commentary on the Mueller report. You don't want to miss that. Plus, in honor of 420, we talk to potheads tonight.